Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez, and I'm actually here at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa right now. Actually, I'm always at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa because, well, it's my home church, and the K-Wave studios are on the campus of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. But today we are here in the fellowship hall as we are doing a live well, if you're listening on the radio, first of all, it's not live, so don't call in with your questions today. But if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, you see the number there on the bottom of your screen. Write it down and call us back the next time we're live, which should be tomorrow. I've memorized that. Isn't that great? Anyway, so we're going to be here for the next hour or so. If you're here in the audience, remember to scan the QR code behind us, and we'll see your question that way. In fact, if I could really quick call the first three people that we're going to get their questions, and those are Ilea and Eric and Marcia. Not necessarily in that order, but if you guys can come over and stand over here on this side, my right. And so let me introduce who is up here on the panel with me. You're hearing them on the radio right now, watching on Facebook and YouTube. First of all, to my left, my boss, Brian Broderson, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.
Thank you. Thank you. Very kind.
And to Brian's left is Dr. Bobby Conway from Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. You also see Bobby on the Christianity Still Makes Sense YouTube channel. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please do. And Bobby's also got a radio program on K-Wave and KSDW called Christianity Still Makes Sense. It airs on the weekends, so you might want to check that out on a Saturday or a Sunday. So, hi guys, how are you?
Great. Yeah.
Check that out. We're in sync, Brian.
Yeah. We're excited. It's great to be here. It's great to see all your lovely faces, and looking forward to just having a nice time sharing together tonight. You know, I love, Bobby was just commenting on the room and just like the warmth of the room, you know, that's one of the reasons why I love doing stuff in here, because I feel like we're just all in kind of a living room, you know, just sitting around talking together, and that's the way we like it. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. And I just am so excited to be back in California with you guys. And I just want to say I'm super stoked to have my bride and my two kids here. Heather, Haley, Dawson. So my daughter flew in from Hawaii, left her husband there because he's a Navy officer and he couldn't leave, but we're having some family vacay and they came out tonight. So good to have you guys with us, and love being here in California, and love my boss. Like you too, Brian.
Oh, well, thanks, Bobby.
Yeah.
All right, so if I already called your names, come on up here. Is that my mic? Am I doing something wrong? I don't know. Anyway, so this is Marcia. Hi, Marcia.
Hello.
And this is your home church too, right?
Yes, it is.
How long have you been coming to church here?
Since 1975.
Nice.
Wow, that is commitment.
Now, before I ask your question, or before you ask your question, I got to make sure that your cell phone is set to silent. We don't want I Love Rock and Roll by Joan Jett to go off. We know that's your ringtone on your cell phone. That happened last week. Remember that? That was great. I'm kidding, Marcia. Come on back. If it goes off, it goes off. Anyway, so you sent us two questions, and what are they?
In all of your studies and so on, do you have any idea when the priests were sacrificing, about how many priests were on duty during that time?
What do you think, Brian?
So just in a general sense, like
Yes.
in the beginning with the tabernacle, later on with the temple, you know, in, I think it's Second Chronicles or first, one of the Chronicles.
Fourth Chronicles.
It's one or the other. In the 24th chapter, it goes through there and it gives you these priestly orders, and there's 24 different orders of priests, and then a number of priests that would serve in each order. So it doesn't give you the exact count, but it was quite a few. Yes. And I would imagine when it expanded to the tabernacle, or to the temple from the tabernacle, the number even increased. Yeah. but I don't know specifically.
Okay.
Do you know?
I mean, I was thinking somewhere, in the hundreds.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think it would be a lot. I mean, you think about all those animal
Yes,
sacrifices. I mean,
exactly.
can you just imagine? Like, hey, can I get a little help here? I've been slaughtering since about 8 this morning, and I'm just vexed with all the blood. If I can just get, a hook up here. So you can imagine they would have had a train of them all trained and prepared.
And your other question had to do with childbirth, I believe.
Yes, it has to do with when a mom gave birth to a girl or a boy, but the purification process is longer for a girl. Do you have any idea? I'm sure it's cultural in some ways, but in all of your study, has there been any discussion about why it was longer to purify following the birth of a girl?
Thank you for your questions, Marcia. Bobby?
When we think about the terms like purification, it can read weird. When you think of terms like clean versus unclean, it's important that when we come across terms like clean and unclean, it doesn't mean sinful and not sinful. Anytime there's sin, it's unclean, but it's not always unclean because it's sin. So it's plausible that because of the blood and some of those types of things, the heavy bleeding that took place, that the purification process of uncleanness, not sinfulness, there was a longer period of being separated out for. But it had nothing to do with one's ontological status before God. That is to say, one's value as a man or a woman is not anything more for the man than it is for the woman when you see a difference in those days. It's just, I think, showing a difference in male and females will obviously, when they're giving birth, there's a lot of bleeding, and then there's that takes place. So that's one explanation.
And another one, interestingly, because this is one of the things that sometimes people who are critical of the faith and of the scriptures, they'll point out sort of a discrimination. This is proof that the Bible discriminates against women. But another perspective is that God was giving to the woman and her newborn daughter an extended period of time for bonding. And I think it just, in some ways, it depends on how you approach it. If you want to find fault, if you want to be critical, if you want to think that, the Bible is barbaric and it's discriminatory and all that, then you're probably going to go for the, it's because it was a woman having a daughter, and they got they didn't get the preferential treatment that the male got. But I think I like to look at it through the other lens and say, no, I think the Lord was doing something between the mother and the daughter and giving them that extended time to bond together.
I like that explanation. And I also think it's important because we have to think in terms of what the context, the milieu is. And as I was sharing on the radio today, take, for example, somebody like C.S. Lewis. We're going to have a hard time understanding C.S. Lewis if we're reading his works without an understanding of his interpretation of medieval history. And so when C.S. Lewis is writing, he is picking up with their cosmological understanding of the planets. But he doesn't believe in that as a model. He understands the modern model of the planets. But what he's doing is he writes a lot about this medieval imagination. And when the age of modernity comes along and basically sweeps away, the old view of looking at a Earth-centric universe and now heliocentric, one of the things that's helpful is for us to realize that the danger of science is now we're just in a machine, everything's mathematics, and we lose our awe that they had in the medieval ages of the heavens when you looked up. So C.S. Lewis leveraged the lowercase t for truth of the imagination looking out into the heavens and how powerful it can be. Well, once we're aware of the influences that captivated the mind of a C.S. Lewis into his writings, now we can interpret Lewis better. Similarly, once we understand the milieu from which the scriptures was written, it can help us. Now, both Pastor Brian and I want to thank you very much for the light questions that you're starting us off on so far. That means a lot, so thank you. We're looking forward to maybe a softball here, but sometimes I think people sit out there and go, let me just find the most random phrase to find, and then let's try to trick them. You ever feel like that?
Stump the pastor.
That's right.
It's okay. It's okay. One last thing, and it just kind of goes along with what Bobby's saying. You know, one of the problems is it's people. We're looking back, 2,500 to 3,000 years into history, and we're looking at it through the lens of the 21st century. And we're determining everything by not just the 21st century, but 21st century Western culture, living in the most advanced and affluent nation in the world. There are still people in the world today who live more like people lived in biblical times than they live like us. And so we have to be aware that we can easily be biased because of our context and imposing our views on another, not just another people and another culture, but another time. So it's wise to not be so quick to make a judgment on those things, I think.
Very good. Thank you very much, Marshall, for your questions. By the way, if you've just joined us on radio or wherever, this is Pastor's Perspective, and we are doing a live program. Well, you're not listening to it live. It's so confusing a pre-recorded program. And here we are in the fellowship hall at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. By the way, if you are listening and your church would like to have us come out and do something like this at your church, let's do it, especially if you're like in Hawaii or someplace like that. I mean, fly us out. We'll do this. It'll be great. Haley, maybe we can go back with you. Will that work? Okay. All right. So our next question is from Elia. Am I saying that right?
What does heaven look like?
What does heaven look like? How old are you?
6.
6 years old. Did you drive far to come here today?
Yes.
Well, you did drive here. Okay. Guys?
So what does heaven look like? Well, I just want to say something really quick that I know about Elia. She's a regular listener to our program, and she asks her mother questions and tells her mother to call us and ask us the question. So she has a very inquisitive mind. What does heaven look like? Well, it's interesting that the Bible doesn't give us a full description anywhere, but if we read in the book of Revelation, for example, we read about a scene where there's a throne and God himself is sitting upon the throne, and he's so beautiful and he's so radiant, and he's like all of these beautiful stones, and his like a big rainbow that's just sort of glowing from this throne. And then we find that there are angels all around that throne. And then we see in that, as that story unfolds, Jesus comes and he's there in the midst of the throne, and the saints are there, all of God's people are there worshiping. But that's just one area. That's just the place where God is seated on his throne. But when we think about heaven, we should probably think about like the world that we live in, because God made the world and he made it very, very beautiful, right? There's some amazingly beautiful places. So I think what we need to think about heaven is that it is the most beautiful place that we could ever imagine. So do you have anywhere that you think, I love that? That place is so beautiful. I wish I could go visit there. Is there any place like that for you?
Disneyland.
Did I hear Disneyland? Disneyland. What's your favorite part of Disneyland?
The princesses.
The princesses. Okay. Well, guess what? Heaven is just, it's even better than Disneyland. It's amazing.
And it doesn't cost as much to get in, right?
No, it's actually free.
It's free. That's right. That's right. All right. Well, thanks for coming up.
Elia.
God bless you.
Bobby, did you want to have a shot at that?
What's sweet about that, was that Elia? Elia? My daughter Haley, I took her on her 16-year-old birthday trip to Disneyland. So we had these things like, certain trips at certain ages that, Heather and I were trying to be intentional with our kids. Well, she wanted to go to Disneyland, and at 16 years old, we're going around, and she's still wanting autographs of all the princesses. And it's the cutest thing. So I got my Mickey hat, and I'm like, I've got my 16-year-old. But I was like, I got to say, I'm like, man, I love the innocence of a 16-year-old standing in long lines wanting the signatures of princesses. So we had a lot of fun together. When you think about heaven, though, sweetheart, there's some discussion about the images that you see. Are they exactly what it's going to be like when we get there? Or is the purpose not of those images to tell us as much of what heaven will look like, but more what heaven is like? And so when we think about being in heaven, imagine never feeling stressed or angry or having a nightmare or being tired or being thirsty. Imagine never having a bad taste of food, a bad sip of a drink. Imagine never being worn out at the end of the day, your body not hurting. Imagine being at a party that was so wonderful that you never wanted to leave. And guess what? You never have to. And that's going to be part of what it will be like to be in a place like heaven.
Can we just go there now? Not yet.
We can if we all take each other's lives. Yeah, we can get there.
I love the passage in Psalm 16. It says, in God's presence is fullness of joy, and at his right hand is pleasure forevermore. Isn't that beautiful? You can fill in the details of that. And one thing I thought, man, what about like eating everything you ever wanted to eat and never gaining 1 ounce of weight, never having indigestion, never having any problems? I can't wait for that part.
Yes. Even like probably, I'm hoping there won't even be a need to use restrooms or anything like that in heaven, right? You don't need to shower because you don't sweat. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? Now we're kind of getting a little bit of license.
TMI.
Okay.
Yeah. We gotta keep the reins on Bobby. Sometimes he just kind of gets out there. So we'll let's move on from the bathroom comments.
Yes, good idea. Speaking of eating, we did get an anonymous question, and somebody is wondering if Bobby Conway ever took us to the Trabuco Oaks Steakhouse, and if he picked up the tab, and if he lost a tie. Well, I can answer that question. No, he did not take us. Therefore, he didn't lose a tie either because we didn't go. But anyway, so Blake and Anissa, if you guys are here, if you could come stand behind me because we'll get to your questions in a little bit. Right now, we're going to talk to Eric. Hi there, Eric.
Good, how you doing?
Good. Where do you live?
Corona?
You drove down here from Corona?
Yes, we did.
Wow. Did anybody else drive from far away like that? Inland Empire people?
Man.
Wow. Thanks for coming out. So what's your question, Eric?
Should churches be more vocal and active in politics or remain quiet and neutral? For example, going to abortion clinics and praying over people as they enter.
Brian?
I think that I think we should take it more to look at Christians individually. And I think as individual Christians, I've been to abortion clinics. I've walked and carried a sign and sought to talk to people that were coming in, prayed outside and so forth. I think there's a good and kind and loving way that you can do that, and you should do that if you are a Christian. I think that sometimes Christians don't do it as lovingly and graciously as they ought to. And sometimes I think the attitude sometimes can be misrepresentative of the heart of Jesus for people. So I think that we should always make sure that we're going out in the spirit of Jesus in his kindness and compassion and grace and mercy and all of those things. But again, I think it comes down in a lot of ways to the individual Christian. What is my conviction? What should I do? When it comes to politics, how involved should I be in politics? And if I am involved in politics, can I do my political things in the Spirit of Christ. I was talking to somebody recently who had been in I think they were in a congressional race in their state, and they were running for office, and at the end they had to really take a step back and ask God to forgive them for the way they had sort of navigated their campaign in regard to their opponent, because they kind of just threw their Christian ethics out the window and went for the jugular with their opponent in order to win the seat, and came under deep conviction and realized that for that particular person it was time to step back from politics for a season to get a fresh perspective and maybe re-enter, but make sure when he does re-enter that he's re-entering in with that Spirit of Christ as the foremost thing. So and I think the same as a church. And so as a pastor of this church, if there are things that nowadays a lot of things that are dubbed political are not necessarily simply political. They've been politicized, but they're moral issues. And so I think we do have a place to address those things, and I think we should address those things.
Bobby, did you want to chime in?
No, I think that was a great answer.
Okay, yes, it was. Eric, thanks for sending in your question using the QR code there on the screen. We've got a few minutes left here in this break, or before we take the break, I should say. Next, we're going to speak with Blake, who also comes here to Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. How long have you been attending, Blake?
About 14 years.
Very nice. And what's your question for us today?
There's a 6-year-old version of the question. There's a 60-year-old version of the question. Should we expect to see Adam and Eve in heaven?
Bobby?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I would expect to see them in heaven. A little bit of the biblical basis behind that, just the whole idea of the garments that were put on them. I think that there's a picture that takes place in that God is showing us that, he covered them with his grace, yet there's going to be consequences down the road. So it's almost like I can't imagine them not being there when I think about that picture and how things start off. But I do think that Adam and Eve would have been the most miserable pair to ever live from the standpoint of being believers. Because you can imagine when we become Christians, we look back at where we were when we were non-Christians and we think, wow, I'm glad I'm not there anymore in sanctification. Well, imagine starting off not in quite a glorified state, but almost like that, and then to fall, to look back. You're always looking back at perfection that you're trying to get back to. And I wonder if there was a frustration for Adam and Eve in the reflecting back. Like, hey, share your testimony about being perfect. Right? Like when we share our testimony, it's like, let me tell you how jacked up I was. But for them, it'd be like, oh yeah, let me tell you about how I used to be perfect. Right? And they're always remembering that. I think that's a unique perspective on their life.
Yeah, and I think just as you follow with the narrative, you have, of course, even after they've sinned, when Eve has Cain, her firstborn son, she says, I have a child from the Lord. So they're still connected to the Lord. They, God deals with them. He brings them to repentance, pronounces a judgment, but I think clearly forgives them. And then when you come to the birth of Seth, through whom the line to the Messiah is going to really kind of be carried, it says that it was during that time that people began to call upon Yahweh. So I think that was through Seth, the influence there. So yeah, I fully expect to see Adam and Eve.
And what's the 60-year-old version of the question?
Should we expect to see Adam and Eve in heaven?
Oh, that was the 60. So what was the 6?
Because it would reflect on the character of God.
Got it. Okay, very good. Well, Blake, thanks for coming up. Anissa, you're next. Are you Anissa? Hi, where do you live?
I live in Aliso.
Oh, very good. So you came up here, not too far. So what's your question for us today?
In heaven, will we have an awareness of family members who perhaps aren't in heaven?
What do you think, Bobby?
I do think we will have that awareness for sure, because we'll have a more complete knowledge. I think the real question is, how can we cope in heaven? How can heaven be heaven if we know there's people that we loved during our time on earth that are in hell? And that is going to take a real miracle in our heart. But I think we're going to have such a sense of God's justice, God's holiness, and our sin that we will be able to love him and praise him for that. In fact, you can see in the book of Revelation where the people that are in heaven, they're at such peace with God's justice that they're actually ready for him to execute his justice. Like again, this is where our culture, we're so soft on sin and on justice and holiness that everything seems cruel. Like disagreement seems cruel. But I think we're going to have God's perspective, and we will know that no one was without excuse. And that's going to be the biggest thing. Like the thing that would make heaven hard with people being in hell would be if we felt like God was unjust and allowing them to go there. But if we have his perspective and realizing that no one's without excuse, that God is just in that, then I think that will allow us to be able to experience our angst being assuaged. Nevertheless, we will have more knowledge. In fact, I think there's going to be an element where we're going to be so aware of all the sin we ever committed. And I don't think God will allow us to be aware of that for the sake of judging us and because we're forgiven as believers. But I think there'll be this moment where we'll be aware of who we fully are and all the deception and mind games we played with ourselves to deceive ourselves. I think that we will have a crisp, clear view of the reality of who we are, and we'll know all the sins that Jesus died for. And in the knowing of how sinful we really were and our motivations, I think that will just overwhelm us and flood us with praise, because we can be grateful this side of heaven with probably just a square inch of understanding of how much we've truly been forgiven of. Imagine when we understand the whole entire enterprise that's been swept away by his grace.
Do you have a follow-up question?
No.
Okay, Brian, thank you. Brian, any thoughts?
No, that was great. The only thing I would add is in the book of Revelation, in the 21st chapter or 20th chapter, there is that point where God will wipe away tears, or be no more crying, sorrow, pain, death, for the former things have passed away. So there is a point where all that was is no longer. And that is the new heaven and earth there. But I think that ultimately that's part of what we need to understand as well, that we're not going to be hindered in enjoying the glory of God in the future because of the sins of the past, whether our sins or somebody else's.
All right, so we are going to take a break in just a few seconds here, and when we come back from the break, we'll answer more of your questions. In fact, Anthony and Trisha, I think those were the other two names that I saw come up. So if you guys can come up, we will answer your question in a few minutes. We're going to take we're going to take a break. I forget we're on radio, so I can't tell you exactly how long the break is because it might be actually shorter. But anyway, so come on up. Anthony and Trisha, we'll get to you guys when we come back from the break. If you are listening on the radio right now or watching us on Facebook or YouTube, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We are not live today. We recorded this episode of Pastor's Perspective at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. That's why it might sound a little bit different. For example, you might hear people in the background laughing every now and then. Perfect. That was perfect. And applauding. So we are live here at Calvary Costa Mesa with Pastor Brian Broderson and Dr. Bobby Conway from Christianity Still Makes Sense and ChristianityStillMakesSense.com. So we will be back in just a little bit with more questions here at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Stand by. Welcome back to Pastor's Perspective. Brian Perez here at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and you're wondering what's the applause? What's going on here? We're live. Well, not live on the radio or Facebook or YouTube. We recorded this episode of Pastor's Perspective at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and everybody having a good time so far? Everybody learning? Good. That's what we try to do on the program every day, Monday through Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. Pacific time. And like I said, if you're listening right now and you want to invite us to come to your church, hey, we'll go. Anyway, so we're going to get some more questions. Brian and Bobby, are you ready?
We are.
Yep, we're ready.
Awesome. So I'm going to step off the stage here, and I think they told me to stand here. Is this my X? Remember when we were all standing on X's, 6 feet apart? That just seems like so long ago. So come on up. This is Anthony.
Yeah.
Awesome. What's your question?
Oh,
Yeah, they won't let me let go of the mic.
fine. I heard it on the radio too. But my question comes from Genesis also. It's like the Lord formed man from dust, and then after that he formed woman because man needed a helper. And so this kind of goes to my question that like, how do I know if like the girl I'm talking to or I'm dating is the right one? Because you're gonna spend your life with it, and you guys are gonna be one flesh. So.
How long have you guys been dating?
Talking for probably like a year now. So.
So just talking, not even dating.
Feels like we're dating, but we're just talking. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Is she here?
No.
Okay, just wondering. And where are you from?
Garden Grove, California.
Garden Grove, very nice. All right, so Bobby, we'll start with you on this one.
There's a lot of people that will think as Christians, oh, I've got to just find like the absolute person. And my fear is they might overlook some good options in waiting for like all the perfect circumstances. So you read in the Bible about an Isaac and a Rebecca, or you start learning about some of these stories that are where a couple sovereignly brought together. I do think that happens. Like I believe with all of my heart that Heather was the one for me. I genuinely believe that. But I don't think the way he worked with her in my life is the thing that God does with everybody. Pastor Brian and I were talking about this on the radio recently, and I think sometimes when people are called to the ministry, it's possible that God does do a little bit of that, like really making it clear because he's bringing two people together who are called into ministry. And so like when I left California as a kid, getting my life cleaned up, I moved to Arkansas to change my people, places, and playthings. And I literally believed when I was going to Arkansas, I was going to find my southern peach. Now, I would later learn that the peaches are in Georgia, but I still called my Arkansas girl my peach. And then I met her, and it was just amazing. And the circumstances, were unbelievable. And I also think there was some of that because Heather and I were going to be in for a lot of intense fellowship in our marriage. And we have known what it's like to experience times where we both wanted to be in Tahiti and not with each other, right? Like we have had some really hard times. We are experiencing the best years of our marital life right now in the last 3 to 4 or 5 years. I think we fought like way too much the first 2 decades, right? I mean, I was just trying to get through to her, and I could not get it. No, I'm just kidding. But all that to say, I don't think it's healthy when somebody has a powerful experience like I think we did, and then you go and say that's what everybody else has. So what are you looking for? Well, I think you're looking for do we have a common set of beliefs? Do we share the same passions? Do we dream about the same things? Is there some similar overlap of interests? Is there some things that, we feel like we can grow? Do our personalities complement? Do we enjoy each other's company? Do we think similarly about some things and yet enough different where we can help each other to grow? And then I think if you find somebody and you feel like this is a godly person that's seeking the Lord, I don't think we need to overdo that process. I think that we can pray and seek the Lord. If we have validation from others, to sit around and wait for our own special rainbow, well, we might miss something as well. So that's what I would say.
Heather, is this true? Oh, I don't know about that laugh. Brian, how long have you and Cheryl been married? 43 years.
Hey, will you tell that
43,
story?
yeah.
Will you tell that story about you and Cheryl arguing and you're speaking and she's texting? Oh man.
So we've been married 43 years, and a few years ago, we were doing a marriage retreat, and a few of you in the room might have been there, and we're doing this retreat. We went out to Marietta back in those days, and we had this Friday night. It was great. We did Friday night together. We had just a wonderful time, and then we were scheduled to do 2 sessions on Saturday. Well, during that time, my youngest daughter, was getting married, and she knew if she went to Dad, it would be a little bit easier to get the dress she really wanted to get, because Dad's a little freer with the checkbook. And so we had worked out that deal. And well, Friday night, somehow, after we spoke and before we could speak the next day, Cheryl found out about this. I can't remember how she found out. But boy, she was upset that
The dress was like $50,000. Okay, so when you think about
no, not quite. But anyway, so we had this big blowout, and so the next morning, it's time for us to speak. I go, come on, honey, we got to go. And she goes, I'm not going out there with you. I'm not going to get up there with you and speak. And I'm like, I'm begging her. I'm doing everything to try to convince her that I'm really sorry and I would never do this again. And she just flat out wouldn't do it. So she didn't do it. So what am I going to do? So I had to go speak to the couples retreat by myself. And not only was I speaking to the couples retreat by myself, but as I'm doing it, I have my phone and she's texting me saying, oh yes, oh the godly husband. Tell the people, tell them how godly you are and how you went behind your wife's back and how, all of this texting is coming through while I'm trying to give a message to encourage the couples. So
I love that.
So when Bobby uses that term intense fellowship, he means that there's friction in the marriage, and Cheryl and I have been known to have some sparks fly between us at times.
Now, Bobby,
Taylor Swift has a song like that,
Don't
right?
you have a similar story, Bobby, of you and Heather got to the airport and she wouldn't get out of the car or something like that?
So my wife and I spoke. Have you ever heard of like the Weekend to Remember Marriage Conference with Family Life? My wife and I were speakers on that team for almost 10 years. So we traveled around the country and we would go to these hotels where you'd have 500 to 1,000, 1,200 people, and we'd do these marriage conferences. Well, we were flying out to do a conference, and we were going to be speaking on communication. And, I'm not the guy that really likes to arrive early. I like to cut it close to see if I can, almost miss the plane but not miss it. And so that's kind of the way I roll. And Heather's, the exact opposite. She wants to get there about 9 hours before the flight takes off. So we show up at the airport, but as we're driving in, there's a parking deck, and she hates when you go fast, but I'm rushing, and we're just going up, and she's getting dizzy, telling me to slow down. And then I park, and I go, let's get out of the car. Come on, let's go. I'm just kind of being intense, because we got to move. And she says, I'm not getting out of the car until you say, I'm sorry. And so here I'm going, please forgive me, but we're on our way to go talk about communication, and I can't even get my wife out of the car. All right? You can look a story up. I jumped out of a moving car when we were dating, for crying out loud, because her mom was sitting in the back seat. I was shotgun, Heather was driving. Family Life shot this story, and they would use it in their curriculum for their home studies. But I jumped out of the car. We were going into downtown Laguna Beach, and I looked at Heather. I can't take it because they were both kind of just going at me. And so her mom flew out from Arkansas to meet the guy and hang out with the guy that Heather's been dating. And, there's some instability here, right? Like, imagine oh, wow, you're dating this guy and he just jumped out of a car in Laguna Beach. And I'm rolling down Pacific Coast Highway. My shirt's torn up. My glasses break. But the point of the story is some people would rather jump out of a car than communicate. And that was me, always escaping communication.
So, Anthony, you still want to get married after hearing all this?
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much. Trisha, hi there. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective. Where do you live?
I live here in Costa Mesa.
Very cool. And how can we help you today? What's your question?
I'm going to try to be succinct because I know there's a lot of explanation, but I was volunteering for a Christian organization that works with youth and young adults, and one of the leaders I was volunteering with was sharing a somewhat heretical belief. Now, I don't believe the organization has that same belief, but I was wondering, do I continue working with her, or how do I approach? The heretical belief was that she told the young kids this, that Eve didn't eat the fruit. She actually had sex with the snake, which what I understand to be heretical from that guy William something or other. Yeah.
So is she the leader of this organization?
She's one of the leaders.
One of the leaders?
Yeah.
And is there anybody that she's accountable to?
I believe so, but would it be unloving or unchristian to not address it to her, but go to, or how do I resolve a heretical?
Yeah, I think this is a situation. I mean, it's a little challenging sometimes when you have to confront people, but we can do it in the right spirit. You ask the Lord for wisdom, but I think you need to just say to her, hey, I don't know where you got that, but that is not right. And if I think you would even be able to say, I want to talk to somebody else about this in the organization, because we cannot be sharing this kind of stuff with anybody. I mean, it is, when you said heretical, first of all, sometimes that word gets thrown around very lightly and applied to things that aren't necessarily heretical, but that is downright heretical. So I think that, yes, talk to her first, see how she responds, and if not, I mean, in one sense, it's sort of Jesus says in Matthew 18, go to your brother or sister, that there's conflict, confront them. If you win them, great. If you don't, take others with you. Ultimately, take it to the church leadership. This isn't a church, so I get it. It's a different thing. But I do think that in this case, you should do something.
Now, Trisha, will you be able to speak to this person, you think, or would it be easier for you to jump out of a moving car?
Maybe the moving car. I don't like confrontation, and I can see she loves God and she loves people and she loves what she does, but it didn't sit right with me. And I was asking the Lord, reveal to me. I never heard this before. I tried looking online, but who had a good explanation was that ex-New Ager, Melissa
Doherty?
Yeah, and I came across one of her YouTube videos that explained that it was a heretical view, and that this guy William something or other, I wish I could remember.
The serpent seed doctrine is toxic.
Oh, okay, yeah. So
yeah, maybe point her to the video. Say, hey, you should check this out. Because what you said is really not right. So
and to share it with the young people.
Yeah, especially that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for coming up. Miguel, you're next. Hi there. Where do you live, Miguel?
Santana.
Oh, so you just walked over here.
Yeah, pretty much.
What's your question for us today?
My question would be, what would you say someone who considers themselves a believer, considers them a Christian, believes in God, believes in Jesus, but doesn't believe in or read the Bible, and doesn't trust it as the true word of God?
This isn't you, right?
No, this is not me.
Just making sure, because we could talk to you about that right now. Bobby, we'll start with you on this one.
I would ask the question, so you're telling me there's a chance, right? What movie? Okay. I would say something like, you're saying to me that you believe that you're a Christian, right? But you don't believe in the Bible, right? Okay. Where are you getting your idea of what a Christian is? Because I would imagine this person's getting their idea of what a Christian is from the Bible. So I'm a Christian, but I'm not a believer in the Bible. Okay, well then, how does that look? for you. So it's possible, like from the standpoint of this person could be struggling with certain maybe books of the Bible. Like you could imagine somebody going to Harvest Crusade, placing their faith in Jesus, and they get saved. But they're not ready for like all 66 books. And so it takes some time, right, in sanctification and discipleship for that person to be aware of why those 66 books are trustworthy. So in the early church, in Acts chapter 2, when it started, you didn't even have the first book of the New Testament written until about AD 49. So a decade and a half of church growth. That's a long time, like a decade and a half of church growth without a single book of the New Testament. That's really cool. Now, that's not now some people, if they go, oh, if they say that and then use that as an excuse to not believe in the New Testament, then that would be dead wrong. So I would just say that. Why or where do you get the idea of being a Christian? And then whatever sources they bring up, they're not going to compete with the Bible. So if they bring up secondary sources, why wouldn't you believe in the primary source? Yeah.
Brian, did you want to add anything? And Jermaine, if you're here, you can come up. We'll get your question.
Yeah, I just was a bit curious, Miguel, about do you think it's just simply ignorance, or do you think that they've gotten something into their head from some other source that says, don't believe the Bible, don't trust the Bible? When this person says they're a Christian, are they understanding, what that really means? Because lots of people in the culture say they're Christians, and they don't have the slightest idea what that actually really means. So where would this person be in regard to those things?
Sure. So these in particular are two family members in particular who think this way. One of them, their exact words were they believe that the Bible was written by men who hate women or something like that. And they've also been put off by seeing how some Christians behave themselves and bad experiences at church, whatever. So they also don't go to church. And for those reasons, they really don't believe and follow.
But they still claim to be a Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, are they willing to discuss, or are they just pretty hostile?
I tried to, but they told me that haven't even been Christian long enough to talk to them about it, so they don't trust my credibility to speak to them. So.
All right. Well, if they really want to know, you can just let them know that, hey, there's plenty of great information out there, the Bible, beginning with the Bible itself, but there's plenty of great literature, all kinds of things that answer those types of questions and show that basically those ideas are not accurate. So,
thanks for coming up. All right, Jermaine, are you here? I was going to get your. Oh, there you are. Hi, Jermaine. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective. Where do you live?
Studio City.
Wait, Studio? That's like far.
I was working there today, and I know about the show. I'm a frequent listener to the program, and I heard about the live one, and I was like, oh, let me come on down after work.
From Studio City.
Yeah. Thanks.
That's probably about as far as Corona. I don't know. But thanks for coming out. So how can we help you? What's your question?
I put a couple questions in, but I think the one is about dating, and that was just a question about is it wise or unwise to do Bible study or prayer with someone you're dating, or should you save that until either more or marriage?
Sorry. So real quick, I think everybody here would probably say yes, you should. But why would you think, no, maybe it's not a good idea?
I've heard people say when you connect spiritually, it can be you connect too much spiritually when you get into the Bible or you pray together, and that should be safe for marriage. That's what I've heard other people say. But I wasn't sure if that was a universal belief or if that's a good habit to do when you're dating early or wait for it later in the relationship.
Interesting. Brian, we'll start with you.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty backward idea about that.
And I have done that with my experience, but then I've heard other people say otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, the scripture, of course, is, calling us to holiness, calling us to purity. So there are things in dating relationships that can, circumstances and things, obviously, that could lead one into temptation or sin. Reading the Bible and praying, I don't think that's really anything we need to worry about that's going to happen. And if it does happen, that's a real major problem. But I think you want to connect deeply spiritually with the person that, if especially obviously if this relationship is going to lead to marriage, you want to make sure you have that deep spiritual connection, because that's going to be the foundation for your life as you go forward. So yeah, I would say that is, look, people can have all kinds of ulterior motives, like, hey, let's study the Bible together, and after that we can maybe kiss a little bit or something, so we just need to, we need wisdom, but just purely with a godly motivation to study and pray together, you can't really improve on that. That's really great.
Bobby Conway?
Well, those are great words. I've heard that as well. I remember hearing that when I was younger. Be careful there. And I thought, well, I'm kind of curious. Like, it seems a little deranged, right? Like picturing two people reading their Bible and just praying together and then just going off the cliff, right? Immorally. You would think that should preserve us a little bit. And so it does. And I'm so thankful. That's how my wife and I were dating. I mean, we were dating, going to church 3 and 4 nights a week, just reading our Bibles together and praying. And my goodness, with all the intense fellowship that we had in that foundational time, I mean, I think that God was hearing us and meeting us in that. And so it absolutely, because if you don't, imagine how much more challenging it's going to be. It's hard enough for us to pray together. Like, I think I did a lot better in those days than I do now leading my wife in prayer, right? Like, sometimes you just get busy. In fact, I said last week to my family, I got to do a better job leading us in prayer. You just get, off course in that. But looking back, had we not prayed and read the Bible together, and now all of a sudden you say, I do, and if you've been dating for a couple years, I think it's going to be awkward for some people. So remove the awkwardness and lay that foundation that way. And then if you didn't lay that foundation that way, well, go into the awkwardness and learn how to find it to be a comfort to you.
Jermaine, thanks for your question. I know you had another one, but we're running out of time, and there's a couple of questions that came in anonymously that I really want to get to because, and when we're done here, we are going to stick around for a few more hours. Did I say hours? To answer your questions. They won't necessarily be on the radio or on Facebook and YouTube, but here are the questions. And the reason we're asking these questions here is I don't know if there's somebody in the room who genuinely is asking this question for themselves or maybe just for a friend or something, but how do you get to heaven? And the other question, do you need to know God to get to heaven? So these were 2 separate questions that were sent in, maybe by the same person. Again, not knowing if they're in a room here where we just assume that everybody's a Christian, but there might be somebody here who's not. Brian.
Well, a very well-known verse is John 14:6, where Jesus states there that he is the way. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. So ultimately, in that same passage, Jesus is telling the disciples, I'm going away to prepare a place for you. And then the question arises, well, we don't know where you're going. How are we going to know how to get there? And so Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So the simple answer is that it's through believing in Jesus that we come to the Father. And ultimately that leads us into heaven, into the presence of God, into our eternal relationship with him. But Jesus is, as it says a few chapters earlier in John chapter 10, Jesus is the door. And he says, if anyone enters through me, they shall be saved. And probably one of my favorite passages to just share with people is John chapter 1, where there, we're actually told about receiving Jesus. He came to his own. Jesus came to his own. In the context is his own people. He came to the nation of Israel. He came to the Jewish people, and his own did not receive him. But it goes on to say, as many as would receive him, to them he gives the power to become the children of God. So as many as would receive him. So when we talk to people, I've heard people say all kinds of things over the years, but sometimes people say, nowhere in the Bible does it say receive Jesus. Well, actually it does. It says as many as received him, to them he gave the power to become the children of God. So that's what we're talking about. That's the entrance into the relationship, the eternal relationship with God. That is, when we're talking about going to heaven, that's what we're talking about.
And if you are that person who sent that question in and you genuinely meant that for yourself, please do not leave without talking to one of us up here. We are just about out of time. Thank you, everybody, for coming out to Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa for our Pastor's Perspective program. Brian Broderson, Bobby Conway, this has been awesome. So God bless you all. And Pastor's Perspective was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.